I'm Gary Edelman with the Civil War Trust War Department, and the Civil War Trust is currently trying to preserve 4 acres around Lee's headquarters at Gettysburg. And I'm here with the greatest living expert on Lee's headquarters at Gettysburg, historian and licensed battlefield guide, Tim Smith. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thanks.
We're going to try to talk about Lee's headquarters and the fight around it as quickly as possible. You ready?
Ready.
Who lived in the building that served as Lee's headquarters?
At the time of the battle, it was the widow Mary Thompson.
When was the house built?
We think about 1833.
Who owned the house?
The house was co-owned by the widow Mary Thompson and Thaddeus Stevens, who purchased it in 1846 in trust for Mary Thompson.
The guy from the Lincoln movie?
Yes, the famous Thaddeus Stevens was a resident of Gettysburg for many years.
And how many children did she have?
She had 8 children.
And did any live in the house with her?
At the time of the battle, her children had all grown and were married, and 2 of them were living nearby, but she lived in a house by herself, we believe.
One of them lived particularly close, right?
Yes, James Henry Thompson, her son, lived directly across the street in a house which is also part of the property in question.
And what happened there during the battle?
During the first day of the battle, the Northern Army used the ridge around the house as a defensive position. The Southern Army attacked and captured the ridge. There was heavy fighting around the building, and in the railroad cut directly behind the house was possibly the largest mass capture of Northern soldiers during the battle.
What units were actually positioned on the track the Trust is trying to save?
There's an excellent account that the 143rd Pennsylvania of Roy Stone's brigade was actually positioned in front of the house near the Chambersburg Pike during the battle. And of course, Battery B, 4th U.S. Artillery, made a stand near the Chambersburg Pike on that property. And possibly part of the 6th Wisconsin was there at some point, part of the famous Iron Brigade.
Well, this is some famous units here, but this is just a little skirmish, right?
It was a scene of heavy fighting on July 1st.
The Confederate commander, Robert E. Lee, arrived on the field and ended up using this house?
Yes, there's much evidence on the evening of July 1st. One of his staff officers selected the house as the location of his headquarters. We should remember that headquarters is not just the location of the general's headquarters, but also all of the staff officers and all the tents associated with the headquarters operation.
So it's a headquarters complex and it is in and around the house?
That is correct. So we do believe there's good evidence that Lee actually was in the house and used it as his headquarters, but there's a whole headquarters complex around the building such as this.
And we know exactly where he pitched his tent, right?
No. As a matter of fact, there's much controversy as actually where the headquarters tent was pitched. And today there's actually an upright cannon barrel that supposedly marks the spot of his headquarters tent. But that documentation for that marker is not very good.
Well, and I actually see right on the marker, there's a quote saying that his headquarters was right there across the road.
Yeah, right on the headquarters marker, which was placed there around 1920, there's a quote saying that this was the site of his headquarters. And it's actually a quote by Robert E. Lee. But in fact, it is not a quote by Robert E. Lee.
So what happened to the building and the area around it after the battle?
Well, for many years, it continued on as a private residence. But eventually, it became Lee's Headquarters Museum in 1921. And then eventually, a motel was added to the complex and a restaurant.
The Civil War Trust preserves battlefields. Why save a house?
Well, I think it's interesting when you go to other battlefields, the headquarters of the prominent generals are always a landmark associated with the fighting. But for whatever reason, this never has been. And this is the site of the nerve center of the Confederate Army during the battle.
And as if all the history you just described isn't enough, Matthew Brady and his crew came and took pictures of the house, right?
Matthew Brady recorded several images of the house at the time, which provide us with valuable insight to the appearance of the building at the time of the battle.
And didn't he take 3 more pictures actually from the property the Trust is trying to preserve?
There is a famous panoramic view of the town of Gettysburg recorded just to the east of the building looking towards the town.
And across the road on the other parcel we're trying to preserve in association with the John Thompson house, he's put his tripod down and took a very famous image as well.
One of the more famous photographs associated not just with Gettysburg, but of the entire American Civil War was recorded on that ridge of 3 Confederate prisoners along a rail barricade.
If the Trust left it up to you to restore this land, what would you do?
If it was my choice, I would restore the historic snake rail fence along the Chambersburg Turnpike, remove the unhistoric parking lot, remove the hotel, reconstruct the historic arbor in front of Lee's headquarters itself, remove the restaurant. And for the first time in 75 years, this area will appear much as it did at the time of the battle.
Thanks so much for joining us, Tim, and thank you for watching.